She hadn't spoken a single word since birth. Doctors said it was impossible. Her father accepted silence as her fate. But one ordinary afternoon in the park, a stranger approached a man society judged before even knowing his name. Within moments, everything changed. Her father froze, his world turned upside down, and the truth about prejudice revealed itself in the most unexpected way. How could a single encounter shatter years of silence and expose the hidden wounds of racism? It was supposed to be a season of peace. After years of building a fortune that most people only dreamed of, Jonathan Hale, a man who had turned every failure into success, should have been living in quiet satisfaction. He owned multiple businesses, drove the kind of cars people stared at, and lived in a mansion that looked more like a palace than a home. To the world, Jonathan had everything. But behind the tall gates and polished marble floors, one truth kept him awake at night. His daughter, Emily, had never spoken a word. From the day she was born, doctors warned that her voice might never come. Specialists in New York, London, even Switzerland all confirmed the same diagnosis. A neurological condition had left her trapped in silence. Jonathan tried everything: cutting-edge therapies, alternative treatments, personal tutors flown in from across the globe. Nothing worked. Every attempt ended in the same heartbreaking quiet. To the world, he was a self-made millionaire. To Emily, he was just a father who couldn't give her the one thing money couldn't buy, a voice. Jonathan carried that weight like a shadow. He loved his daughter with an intensity that consumed him. Every day, he tried to fill her silence with comfort. Piano lessons she listened to but never joined, books he read aloud while she simply smiled, and long drives where her laughter, silent as it was the only sound he longed to hear. Yet no matter how hard he tried, silence ruled their lives. On the surface, Jonathan appeared strong. He hosted charity dinners, smiled in interviews, and signed deals with confidence. But inside, he was breaking. The guilt ate at him. He couldn't shake the thought that somehow he had failed Emily, not as a provider, but as a father. He wanted nothing more than to hear his daughter call him dad just once. And so, he clung to routine. Every Saturday, without fail, he took Emily to the park. It was their ritual. She loved the sight of the fountains, the distant laughter of children, and the simple joy of feeding ducks by the pond. For Jonathan, those afternoons were bittersweet. They reminded him of what was missing: a voice in the midst of all the sounds around them. Still, it was the closest thing to normalcy they had, and Jonathan guarded it fiercely. But the park wasn't always kind. In quiet glances and hushed whispers, he often caught the judgment of strangers. Some pitied Emily, others looked away, but some, without saying a word, seemed to question why a man like him was always so guarded, so distant. On certain days, he could feel the weight of eyes following him, and not always with kindness. Jonathan was used to being envied for his wealth, but there was something else in those stares, something colder, and yet nothing could have prepared him for what would happen that one afternoon. The day began like all the others, Emily holding his hand, her eyes wide with quiet wonder as they walked beneath the trees. The air smelled of spring, and sunlight filtered through the leaves like golden threads. It was ordinary in every way. Too ordinary. What Jonathan didn't know was that his carefully constructed world of silence and control was about to crack. A chance encounter, a stranger he never expected, and a truth he had spent years avoiding, these would collide in a moment that would change not just Emily's life, but his own. And when it came, Jonathan wouldn't just witness a miracle. He would be forced to face the uncomfortable reality of prejudice, one that no amount of wealth could shield him from. The afternoon sun stretched across the park, casting long shadows over the playground. Jonathan and Emily had settled by the pond, tossing breadcrumbs to the ducks. It was the same spot they always chose: safe, familiar, predictable. Yet on this day, something felt different. Jonathan couldn't place it at first, but the air seemed heavier, charged, as if waiting for something to break. Across the park, a man approached. He walked with calm strides, his hands tucked into his jacket, eyes focused not on Jonathan, but on Emily. His skin was dark, his presence unmistakable. Jonathan noticed it immediately, not because the man was threatening, but because of how the world around them reacted. Parents pulled their children a little closer. Conversations hushed. A jogger slowed, eyes narrowing before continuing past. The shift was subtle, but Jonathan felt it. The weight of judgment didn't fall on him this time, it fell on the stranger. Still, Jonathan stiffened. It wasn't the man himself that made his heart race. It was the unspoken fear society had stitched into him. He had grown up in privilege, shielded from struggle, but he had absorbed enough whispers, enough news headlines, enough warnings to feel the pull of suspicion. And now that suspicion warred with guilt. Was he protecting Emily, or was he falling into the same trap he despised in others? The man drew closer, his eyes locked on Emily. She didn't flinch. In fact, she tilted her head as if drawn to him, curious in a way Jonathan hadn't seen before. Jonathan reached instinctively for her hand, ready to guide her away, but before he could move, the man stopped a few feet from them. He knelt down, bringing himself eye level with Emily. The world seemed to pause. Every sound, the laughter of children, the splash of water, the chirp of birds faded into a low hum. Jonathan's pulse thundered in his ears. He was caught between action and stillness, not knowing whether to pull his daughter back or let this play out. And then, the stranger smiled. It wasn't forced or calculated. It was warm, disarming. The kind of smile that told a child they were safe. Emily's eyes widened, and for the first time, Jonathan saw something different in her: recognition, maybe even trust. She leaned forward slightly, as if to hear him better. Around them, the stares grew sharper. A woman at a nearby bench whispered to her friend, casting a glance so sharp Jonathan felt it cut through him. He knew what they were thinking. A wealthy white man and his fragile, mute daughter. Why was she engaging with him? Jonathan could almost hear the judgment swirling. Dangerous, suspicious, out of place. The stranger ignored the onlookers. His focus never wavered from Emily. Slowly, almost reverently, he placed his hand over his heart, then pointed to her. A simple gesture, but one that carried weight. Emily blinked, then astonishingly mirrored the motion. Jonathan's breath caught. He had seen her mimic things before, but this was different. There was meaning here, a connection deeper than imitation. His instinct to intervene clashed with the realization unfolding before him. Something was happening, something extraordinary, and he didn't understand it yet. But the crowd did, and they didn't like it. A man nearby muttered under his breath, loud enough for Jonathan to catch. "What's he doing near that girl?" Another voice joined in, sharper. Someone should say something. The tension thickened. No longer quiet judgment, but creeping hostility. Jonathan's chest tightened. For years he had fought Emily's silence, but now he faced a different battle, a wall of prejudice rising against a man who had done nothing but kneel before a child. And then it happened. Emily parted her lips. At first, it was only a sound, small, broken, fragile, but it was there. Jonathan froze. The stranger's expression didn't change. He simply nodded as if he had been expecting it all along. Emily tried again, her tiny voice cracking the silence like glass shattering. The miracle Jonathan had prayed for was unfolding before his eyes. Yet instead of celebration, the park grew restless. Whispers turned to sharp words, suspicion into unease. The man who had given his daughter a voice was now at the center of scrutiny, his kindness overshadowed by the color of his skin. Jonathan's joy battled his fear. He wanted to shout, to thank the stranger, to fall to his knees in gratitude. But the crowd's eyes burned into him, daring him to choose. Would he defend the man who had just broken years of silence, or would he stay silent himself, swallowed by the same prejudice now threatening to erase this moment? And before Jonathan could decide, voices rose louder, steps drew nearer, and the confrontation he had never imagined was about to begin. The voices swelled until they felt like a storm, pressing in on every side. Parents pulled their children closer. A man with folded arms muttered, "He shouldn't be near her." Another snapped, "Someone call security." The words cut through the air, sharp and accusing, though the stranger had done nothing but kneel in front of a child. Jonathan's chest pounded. His daughter, his silent, voiceless daughter, had just spoken. The miracle he had begged for was happening right in front of him. Yet instead of applause, instead of tears of joy from those watching, all he saw was suspicion. All he heard was venom disguised as concern. Emily's tiny voice quivered again, a fragile sound that seemed to fight for life against the weight of the crowd. Jonathan wanted to shout, to silence the whispers, but his throat locked. The stranger stayed calm, still kneeling, his eyes filled with patience and gentleness that no one else seemed willing to see. And then it escalated. A man in a park uniform strode toward them, his jaw tight, eyes narrowed. His voice was cold, authoritative, meant to carry. "Sir, I need you to step away from the child." The word struck Jonathan like a blade. The child wasn't just anyone, it was his daughter. And the man giving her her first words, the one unlocking her silence, was being treated like a criminal. The stranger didn't move, not out of defiance, but because Emily had reached for him. Her tiny hand brushed against his, trembling but intentional, as if she sensed he was the key to something no one else had ever given her. The crowd gasped. To them, it wasn't a miracle. It was a scandal. The guard's voice rose sharper, angrier now. "Step away, or I'll remove you myself." He placed a hand on the radio at his belt, ready to escalate. Jonathan's instincts screamed at him to intervene, but years of silence and privilege weighed him down. He had always been the man in control, the one people listened to, yet here he stood watching, frozen as injustice unfolded before his eyes. His daughter's first words were being drowned out by fear, by prejudice, by the simple fact that the man helping her was black. And then Emily spoke again, clearer this time. A single word, trembling but unmistakable. Die. The park fell silent. Jonathan's world cracked open. The sound hit him harder than any deal, any fortune, any achievement he had ever chased. Tears burned his eyes. This was the moment he had dreamed of for years. But instead of celebration, he saw the guard's hand tighten, saw the crowd step back as if a line had been crossed. Jonathan snapped. He surged forward, finally finding his voice. "Stop." The word tore from his throat, desperate, raw. But it was too late. Two more guards were approaching, eyes fixed on the stranger, not on Emily, not on the miracle unfolding before them. Phones came out. A dozen cameras pointed in their direction. To some, this was entertainment. To others, it was evidence. Jonathan realized with horror what this meant. The man who had just given his daughter a voice might lose his own. Not in silence, but in the crushing weight of a system that had always seen his skin before his humanity. The stranger slowly raised his hands, palms open, surrendering without a word. His eyes flickered to Jonathan, not with anger, but with something deeper, expectation, as if to say, "Will you speak when she finally can?" Jonathan's heart thundered. He stood at the edge of a choice that would define him forever. Stay silent and watch a man punished for a gift no one else could give, or step into the storm and defend the truth. The crowd pressed closer. The guards reached out. Emily's small voice broke through once more, fragile but pleading. "No." The world stopped, and in that frozen moment, Jonathan realized this wasn't just about a miracle. It wasn't just about his daughter. It was about the ugliness no money, no power, no gated mansion could hide from. The question was no longer whether Emily had a voice. It was whether Jonathan would use his. The chaos in the park did not end with shouting, or with hands being forced to the ground. It ended with silence, the kind that carried more weight than noise ever could. Emily's voice, so fragile and new, had broken through the storm for only seconds, but it was enough to stop everyone in their tracks. The guards froze, the crowd hushed, and for the first time in years, Jonathan saw his daughter not as a child locked in silence, but as a voice, small, trembling, but undeniable. The stranger lowered his hand slowly, eyes still fixed on Jonathan. He did not plead, he did not argue. He simply stood, as if daring Jonathan to decide whether to be part of the problem or part of the change. Jonathan's heart pounded as he stepped forward, placing himself between the guards and the man who had given his daughter a miracle. She spoke. Jonathan's voice cracked, raw with disbelief. For the first time in her life, she spoke. His words trembled into the quiet park. echoing against stone and steel. No one replied. No one celebrated. Because for many, the miracle wasn't the story. They still saw danger where there was none. But Jonathan did not waver. In that moment, he realized his silence had been complicity. For years, he had shielded Emily, kept her world small, thinking his money could protect her from pain. But money couldn't erase prejudice. It couldn't silence whispers. It couldn't stop the way the world looked at this man simply because of the color of his skin. The guards hesitated, glancing at one another. The weight of the crowd's stares shifted. Cameras were still rolling, every second being captured, immortalized. Jonathan knew the narrative could go two ways. Another story of injustice, another life crushed under suspicion, or a story where, for once, someone with power chose to stand up. He chose. With a firm voice, louder this time, Jonathan said, "He stays." He helped her. He gave her what no one else could. His words carried not just authority, but truth. And though the guards did not answer, they lowered their hands. Slowly, the tension bled out of the scene, leaving only the echo of what had just happened. The stranger nodded once quietly, then turned to leave. He didn't wait for thanks, didn't linger in triumph. He simply walked away, as if used to giving everything and receiving nothing in return. Jonathan wanted to chase after him, to apologize. For every unspoken suspicion, for every second he hesitated, but his feet stayed rooted. Emily tugged at his sleeve, her eyes wide, her lips forming the word again, "Daddy." Tears streamed down his face as he knelt, holding her close. He had gotten the miracle he had dreamed of, but it came with a truth he could no longer ignore. It wasn't just his daughter who had been voiceless. It was every man, woman, and child silenced by prejudice, judged not for who they were, but for what the world decided to see. In the days that followed, Jonathan replayed the scene in his mind. He knew the world would move on, that the videos would circulate briefly, that the whispers would return to normal. But for him, nothing was normal anymore. He had witnessed firsthand how quickly kindness could be twisted into suspicion, how easily a miracle could have been erased by ignorance. And he knew staying silent was no longer an option. This wasn't just about Emily finding her voice. It was about him finding his, about every person finding theirs. Because here is the reality. Racism doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it whispers in the glances, hides in the questions, lingers in the doubts that people are too polite to say out loud. And unless someone speaks, unless someone interrupts the silence, those whispers grow into chains. So the question remains, not just for Jonathan, not just for Emily, but for all of us watching, listening, remembering, when the moment comes to stand, when the choice is laid bare. Will you remain silent? Or will you use your voice to break someone else's chains? If this story moved you, don't let it fade here. Share it, talk about it, and let your voice be heard. Because silence helps no one. Leave your thoughts below. Together, maybe we can turn whispers of change into something the world can no longer ignore.